what we're going to be talking about today is how Skiff has changed over its history since its establishment in Melbourne. We won't be talking about the earlier Skiff. We're talking about Melbourne Skiff. So really how it's changed over the decades, looking mainly at the 1950s, the 1980s, and the current day. And hopefully if we have time, we can talk about where Skiff is going in the future. But obviously that is a lot to talk about in the short time that we have. So what I'm going to do, first of all, is soon I'll be uploading a document into the chat so that everyone has access to it. And I'm going to be splitting us all into 3 breakout rooms. Each of your rooms will be a time period. So breakout room 1, I think it should tell you which one you're in. You guys will be the 1950s. Breakout room 2 will be the 1980s. And breakout room 3, sorry, I've said these the reverse way. Breakout room 3 is the 1950s. Breakout room 2 is the 1980s. And breakout room 1 is the 2010s, whatever that era is called. And so what we will be doing is spending about 5 to 8 minutes in those breakout rooms talking about why that period of time was the best era in Skiff's history. And I will be giving this document, which will have a little bit on each of these decades. And then after that, we're going to come back and have a bit of a debate about why your decade was the best era of Skiff in Melbourne. And you will also have access to the other team's information. This is just in case you need a bit of extra embellishment of your own knowledge. So you will have access to some information from the other decades as well. So you can put together a rebuttal. So hopefully, if we have time, we'll all go around each group and have a representative to talk about why your decade was the best decade of Skiff's history. And then hopefully we can go around and then you can rebut someone else's argument about why that decade is in fact inferior to your own decade. So I will first upload this document into the chat. Hopefully I can figure out how to do that. I might just have to stop sharing. Stop sharing screen to figure this out. Okay, so everyone should see a PDF come into their chat in just a moment. Once it loads. Okay, so that has been sent through. And now I'm going to be splitting you into your breakout rooms. You'll have a little over 5 minutes. So what I want you to be talking about is what you can read through. Maybe one person can read aloud the information about that decade and then talk about those points and in addition to other ones that you might know about, and come up with an argument, a really strong argument for why Skiff was the strongest then, it represented itself best then. Does that all make sense?
That's a great one.
Love it, Rachel.
I'm trying to think, guys, trying to help us here.
What do you guys?
I think with technology, we can probably educate skippists now about more global issues and global events because we can get information on them quite quickly. I'm not sure that would have been the same in the 50s and 80s.
You know, I think also one of your benefits and maybe one of the positives of COVID-19, I don't know, is probably in this era more so than the 50s and the 80s, the other 2 time periods, we would have been much more insular. Whereas because of the technology, we connect much more with people overseas, and Sabina being here is a good example of that. So we can use it as our trump card.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, with technology, just being more in general, and like it's more interactive. Like we have this Skiff website and like fun activities on that, and like all our social media, and like being able to have like things like this. So
I would love to know what Abby thinks. She's, I think, the youngest member of our group here.
I think, well, I don't know, I can't really compare it because I've only been at Skiff in like the 2010s. So I don't know how I could like compare it to other eras, but maybe like, I don't know, maybe the issues we talk about are more, I don't know. I can't really compare it, but
maybe that's our answer. Maybe we need to say Skiff in the 2010s is better because Abby's been here. That's our answer.
Has there been also more communication or more things done with other youth groups? Because you were doing Tikkun Shavuot with at Hubbo, and there's more communication and more. Would you say that or not?
Yes, there is, because we tried it in our time, and we would sometimes try and do stuff. I think we had a good connection with Husky because they were closest to our ideology, but at that time it was almost impossible because GIF was absolutely deemed an anti-Zionist youth movement. And we were just told straight to our faces, oh, look, if you don't want to make Aliyah, you're not really a Jew. So there wasn't any compromise, and there wasn't this understanding that Doikate means, you foster your Jewish identity wherever you are, whether that's in Melbourne or in Israel or in Terra del Fuego,
Yeah.
I reckon we could probably also argue that we're probably the generation where you see the most generational connection to Skiff in Melbourne, because Elisa, your generation, probably there were still people whose parents had not come from Skiff in Melbourne. They had been, overseas, or I don't know, even in Skiff before the war. But I would say that the 2010s are probably and beyond are the generation where we see an actual transition of Skiff families from Melbourne.
Yeah, I mean, Indigo always says, oh, so-and-so's, there's a legacy and a something else. So the one is where you come from a Skiff family, or if your parents married at Skiff, and there's all these terms and stuff that we didn't have. I mean, I didn't come from anything. I went to Skiff because my cousins went.
You're third generation.
Yeah, the Jacobs, they're royalty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Third, more than third. Yeah, Sam's dug up some history, and it's like fourth generation at least of Skiff, because it was but that's a good point, that it is now kind of a generational thing.
Yeah, it's embedded.
I reckon that's also like the sign of, in a way, like that continuity is a good sign. So maybe that's also a plus. I think, Ruby, what do you think?
You were gonna say.
Yeah. What?
I was gonna say, I think maybe the Yiddish as well. I'm not sure exactly, but it seems like the second generation were sort of forced into learning Yiddish in Sunday schools and stuff like that. It seems like the optional learning of Yiddish is really picked up in the 2010s, and there's like a big passion for it. That's not pushed by parents or anything. It's more, I think our generation's really tried to take it on.
Yeah, out of desire rather than need.
Yeah, that's the good kind of second wave.
Yeah.
What do you think they're gonna say?
I think 1950s will say they're the benchmark for what we were supposed to be, which is not true, and I can say that as a professional academic on this subject. But so I think they'll go down the path of they're the originals. I reckon the 80s will go down the path of there was no, technology on camps, and that was a good thing, and that sort of stuff, and more freedom.
And creativity. Because, when you had 4 weeks on a camp, you wrote songs. We had a camp newsletter that came out every week. We had a radio program we did every morning. You had time in 4 weeks to, establish stuff. And, I love
Okay. Sorry for, I hope that wasn't sudden. I hope it gave you the minute to round up. I'm not exactly sure.
Now I'll never know what Elena's going to say.
So
I was about to say the most profound thing.
it said it was going to give everyone 60 seconds.
And then it stopped. Helene was in the middle of a profound statement.
Well, hold on to those profound statements, because we have only 10 minutes left, but I want maybe one representative from each group to talk about what was the most important about that time period. Why is that time period the most superior out of all of Melbourne skiff? So maybe we'll start with 1950s, which I think is breakout room 3. Anyone most passionate?
Well, that was the group I was in, but we cheated because there was no one there that remembered the 1950s except for me and Henry, and we barely remembered them. So we spoke more about the 1960s, which weren't a lot different. And the things that we know were great then was we had tents and we had to make our own toilets, or by the time I got there, we already had toilets, but it was as though we made them ourselves because they were horrible. And Dijon was real Dijon. And there was a lot of Yiddish, and every Kreis song was in Yiddish. I'm writing a piece at the moment about all that time, and I'm trying to remember some of these things. And it's like every Kreis song was in Yiddish. I hardly remember any even English words in those Kreis songs. I keep thinking of things and then forgetting them. Henry, are you ventriloquizing me again?
Have I muted you? Maybe it works now.
Everybody had to eat the same food.
Yeah, everybody had to eat the same food, and I also mentioned that I had some protection, so I occasionally got something else because my cousin was my helper and he used to sneak me things on my first camp. And the other thing, and this is like in the early to mid 60s, the founders and all the people from that generation would still come to our camps, even though they weren't our helpers anymore. But I never remember a camp where Pinya, Dudi's father, wouldn't come up and spend a couple of days or a couple of separate days and deliver a kreis or teach us something. And Simcha would come up, Simcha Bursten, Ina's father, would come up at least once a camp, and especially in junior camps would teach us songs and do these little tricks. Some of you might know them, where he created this whole yucky stuff of Vegemite and jam and vinegar and all sorts of things, and he put his finger in it and lick it, and he asked people to do that and say what it was. And in the end, he showed us what he really did was he put one finger in and licked the other finger. Right, but so there were all these, and he taught us Mein Hut Dreiecken and things like that. So, and then David Bursten, Senior, and Morris Bursten would come up on the last day and help us pack up the camp, which was a big deal, pulling down tents and packing away beds and things. So we had a real continuity with people who had created skiff in Melbourne, and it was really clear. And I just remembered the thing that I keep forgetting. We had a lot of themed days, and I've been trying to remember all of them, not just Tag van Hurben, but we had a Tag van Vrijheid, which I've written to about 30 people in the last 3 weeks trying to remember exactly what it was. We can't remember exactly, but I think it was when the Lagerrat ran the camp. So the Kreisvorsitzers and the Camp Vorsitzer, which wasn't what you call Vorsitzer now, it was like Skiffisten were voted into these positions. And there was one day where we ran the camp and we were the helfer. And that was, I think it was called Tag van Vrijheid, but no one can confirm that. And we had a Tag van Nacht where we got woken up at about midnight. Midnight
Midnight for Appel.
for our pal, and then we had breakfast, and the whole day happened. At night, we had a Tag von Freude where we did all sorts of really wacky things, like, had, sandwiches for breakfast and cereal for dinner and all sorts of crazy things. I can't remember more. When I write the thing, you'll all see it. But
well, that sounds amazing, like an amazing
so it was a great
time
time.
to be at Skiff.
Yeah, 60s. That's the 60s, mind you, but probably slightly different, but not a lot from the 50s.
Well, that sounds amazing. Thank you for sharing all of that. Very, very interesting to hear how it was a different period. We have only a few minutes left, so maybe 1 minute from 1980s and then 1 minute from 2010, and then we will end with some final remarks.
Well, I'm happy to speak on behalf of the 80s as a Helfer and Vorsitzer from that time. And basically, the 80s, late 70s, 80s were the best time. We had a transition of Skiff from, an organisation that had many overseas-born Polakische Yidden to really an Australian camp with Australian ethoses. A lot of the activities that are run today were introduced then. So Olympiad started in the 70s, Yiddish Schreiberstag started in the late 70s, Song Festival started in the 70s and 80s. It was the transition of camps from tents through to cabins. We went from, the document's a little bit wrong. It said that we had 4-week tent camps. That was in the 70s. By the 80s, we started going to 3-week camps in cabins. We had much better music in the 70s and 80s than anything ever since then.
Barramunga was still 4 weeks.
Sorry?
Barramunga was still 4 weeks.
Yeah, that was 79, 80.
Well, that's the 80s.
The cusp, Duddy.
It's not.
Yeah, and we were able to sing songs without backing tracks. We were able to remember dozens or hundreds of songs and sing the tunes without any need for accompaniment. There was still enough Yiddish speakers.
That hand wrote out.
We still had enough Yiddish speakers to be able to run activities for some kids entirely in Yiddish, but it was clear that there was a transition that was happening. So it was the transitional era when Skiff went from being what it was towards what it is today.
Very interesting. Thanks, Dudi. Someone from the 2010s want to have the room for the last minute. Anyone?
I'll do it. Well, first of all, we mentioned that this was the era. In fact, this is 2010 to 2011 is the first year we went back. Well, not went back, but we changed from 2-week camps to 2.5-week camps. It's also the era of mini Skiff, looking at our future and building up our youngest junior Kreisen. It is also our time period for our strong relationship with Charnwood, which of course started just before that, but we continued that relationship with the Lindrosses and Ozcamp. It's also the period in which we start to see second and third generation much more evidently in the Skiffistan of Skiff in Melbourne families, not just Skiff in Poland families. It's also the era that brings us Abby, who is the youngest member of our group. And I think that's the most important thing. This is the era in which our younger Chevre grew up in Skiff and is shaping the future for Skiff. So that's what makes us the most important era for Skiff in Melbourne.
Thank you, Razel. Very well spoken, everyone. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for. I would love to keep talking about this for probably about another hour, and I'm sure there are many amazing stories to tell from all of the previous decades of Skiff, including today's. Some final thoughts, maybe things you can just think about yourself that we haven't had time to talk about is, well, obviously there have been some changes throughout Skiff's history, throughout the decades, but what are the things that have stayed the same? And are these things integral to SCIF? Are there certain things that if we lost SCIF, would we lose SCIF's integrity? So have a think about that, whether we have some core elements, not just our ideologies, things other than that. And maybe thinking about what's the current greatest challenge to SCIF and how we are approaching that, or how we should approach that, and why SCIF has survived and thrived so long in Melbourne, 70 years strong, and where will we be 70 years from now? So thank you everyone for coming along. I hope you have learned something, taken something from this. I know I have. And I look forward to seeing what the next sessions are this evening. I hope you'll all be tuning into those as well.